for a moment of reflection, followed by the pledge to the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We have an agenda that's been published. I have one correction to the agenda under 2F. It says the board authorization is an information item. That will be an action item. So with that change, I'd like to ask for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
I'll take that as a motion from Reverend Newbill and a second from Ms. Green. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, perfect. Safety briefing for Mr. Zahn.
Thank you, Chair. Safety is a core value of JEA, and since there's a lot of people in this room today, I'd like you to please take note. In the event of emergency, can I have somebody that's going to call 911 from staff? John McCarthy. Anybody CPR certified? Melissa Dykes. Also, please look to your right. That is your safety buddy. In the event of emergency, we will proceed in an orderly fashion to the stairs that are to the left of the elevators, proceed down using the handrail, and cross Church and Main and reconvene there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zahn. Sunshine Law Public Records Statement from Lasekia Hodges, Office of General Counsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This meeting is being held in compliance with Florida's Government and Sunshine Law, Section 286.011 Florida statutes, and shall be open to the public at all times. Official acts of the JEA Board may be conducted at this meeting that will be considered binding on the JEA. Reasonable notice has been provided, and minutes of this meeting shall be taken and promptly recorded.
Thank you very much, Lasekia. For those of you who pay attention to these sorts of things, you'll notice that we've got a slight deviation from our general accepted order. We usually have comments from the public at this time. However, because we will have a detailed presentation from the various bidders for JEA's headquarters, we're going to take the comments from the public out of order. They'll be heard after we've had a presentation, overview, and evaluation from staff and from our outside experts, CBRE. Before we begin our presentations, I would like to take a moment and thank the JEA working team who have spent countless hours on this project, specifically Nancy Kilgo, John McCarthy, Melissa Dykes, Jennifer Connell, Chris Kane, Julie Crawford, Steve Datz, Ed Dender, Brandon Edwards, Robert Grokuk, Jason Hutchinson, Paul McFadden, Jordan Pope, Matt Poteet, Sheila Presley, and also with additional support, Stephen Bossier, Blake Osner, the entire customer communications team consisting of Caitlin Armstrong, David Goldberg, Joy Gutas, Michael Haddon, and the EA team. Thank you very much. I realize that this has been a burden to you over the last 3 months, 6 months, 15 months. It's been a long time. No, Melissa's like higher. 4 years. 4 years. So thank you very much. Your work is evident in the presentations that we have today, and we really are very much indebted to each and every one of you for all the work that you put into that. So thank you. With that, I'm going to ask for Nancy Kilgo to join us at the table for an overview and evaluation today. Nancy? Oh, she's joined by the whole team. So we also have from CBRE, Mike Harrell, Stuart Green, and from the law firm of Edwards & Cohen, David Edwards. So thank you. And should we also thank Leanne Kors? She's not with you today, but she's another valuable member of the CBR team.
Yes, sir.
So thank you. Nancy.
Yes, sir. I'm going to get myself organized. And we're ready to project the presentation. Thanks to everyone for being here. As Chair Howard said, there have been many people supporting this effort, including a huge effort by each of the proposing teams in the beginning responses and in the additional shortlist information. I'm going to talk through an overview of the process first, and hopefully we can get the first PowerPoint slide put up.
4 years and it comes down to this. There you
we
go.
Thank you. So we embarked on the idea of the new headquarters about 4 years ago to address business continuity risks, our aging building conditions, the large size of our current buildings, and general employee safety considerations. The slide that's projected has an overview of the process, but I'm going to go through a little more detail because we have had quite an extensive process. The idea for solicitation for a new headquarters was discussed in the summer of 2018. The board discussed selection criteria categories and weighting at 2 or 3 of its regular board meetings, August-September timeframe. We worked on developing an invitation to negotiate solicitation in September-October. We engaged CBRE Development Advisory to assist us in the process. We released the ITN October 15, 2018, published 6 addenda to the ITN, which refined building size ranges and conceptual program needs and answered questions that were received of the prospective bidders. We received responses on January 8. The responses, all of them were analyzed by CBRE and JEA subject matter leads. The shortlist was announced at the January 22nd regular JEA board meeting. Negotiations commenced with the shortlisted firms after the announcement. Each shortlist firm participated in a presentation interview on January 28th. We announced additional time to provide for public information and public review and additional negotiation time. The public information presentations by the shortlist firms were given to the board of directors in a special meeting on February 5. Best and final offers were received March 11, and we posted the best and final offers on JEA.com on March 28. The additional time was very beneficial to the negotiations and process. It allowed for us to develop a draft lease, including construction addendum, and a development responsibility allocation matrix, which provides a more comprehensive view and should result in reduced negotiation time after approval by the board to negotiate. The scoring methodology topics were further refined and defined and explained, and we published the scoring matrix with addendum 4 to the ITN. So the score sheet we used was the one that was published in the ITN. A single score myself was advised by CBRE and subject matter experts to JEA, including security, building operations, customer experience, information technology, and financial leads. Procurement staff advised and assisted throughout the process to maintain strict adherence to procurement protocol. Clarification sessions were held with the 5 qualifying respondents during initial analysis. Additional negotiation calls and meetings were held with the shortlist respondents and CBRE. The draft lease with construction addendum and development allocation matrix were provided to each firm for review and comment. The scores for the presentation, interview, and early development plans were added to the initial qualitative scoring. Quantitative or financial scores have been updated with information submitted and contained in the best and final offers. This slide is just an overview of the locations in relation to JEA's current headquarters. We're going to show a rendering of each company's submittal. This is the Lot J Bay Street, and we're going in order of their official legal names, so these might seem out of order, but everything will be alphabetical. I'll explain that in a minute. Kings Avenue Station and West Adams Street. I'm going to go through a little overview of each shortlist location, and you'll see that on the screen. Lot J is in the sports complex on the north bank. They're offering a site for us as a blocks in a proposed mixed-use development. We've got an approximate 6-story building now. We're working now with a normalized square footage of 190,000 square feet, but we are planning to get more efficient as we go through further building design and programming, and hopefully can reduce the building size. One feature of that proposal is a single-story attached customer center. So that's a little different than the other buildings. We have employee count across the board to match our existing downtown employee head count of 760. And Lot J is proposing parking in an adjacent garage that will also serve the larger mixed development. And we would be provided 850 spaces per the requirements in the ITN. Their schedule's about 35 months, and they're proposing LEED Silver certification. Kings Avenue Station is on the south bank near the current JTA Regional Garage. The site is in office hotel mixed-use development. The office portion of that is proposed with this building proposal. It's approximately 8 floors, again, same head count. And their proposal includes using the existing JTA garage as a shared garage and attaching that with a bridge, again, full parking as requested in the ITN, schedule of 29 months, and LEED Silver proposed. On Adams Street, it is Block 48 that we looked at early on at 325 West Adams. It is a full city block in the downtown core, an approximate 9-floor tower. Again, same head count, and they are proposing to build an adjacent garage that would be dedicated to JEA. 25-month schedule and LEED Gold proposed. We were asked, or the board members asked of the shortlist firms during the public presentation on February 5 about their really past history in using diversified labor, minority and women-owned. And we asked for some additional information, which each firm did submit on their past practice and kind of meeting goals. And we've compiled a summary because we had information from each group in their original proposals. There was this additional submittal after the public information meeting, and then people also included more information in their best and final offer. So this is staff, my attempt at summarizing the highlights of what they were conveying. We have full information available. So in Lot J, they proposed 15% goal in professional services, 25% in construction services, 25% in operations procurement, and in their original proposal had a goal of trying to use 50% of local labor. Some of the highlights, I'm not going to read all of these, but was to have a JSIP firm on the ground consultant to coordinate with other companies about the project. And all of the companies really have the goal to communicate and get the word out as much as possible to get good participation. Lot J also suggested breaking down and resizing bid packages where possible to eliminate barriers and encouraging the general contractor to process timely payments for properly invoiced work. On Kings Avenue, they proposed 20% of the construction subcontracted work. Their GC has an existing and evolving JSIB subcontractor and vendor network. They proposed outreach events at the site, advertisement regarding opportunities, a large business purchasing and strategic inclusion program, mentoring with a JSIB GC, incubation workshop training, and reporting and sharing successes related to the project. And again, I'm not reading every bullet. On Adams Street, they had an inclusion goal for all construction projects of 20%. That is their typical practice. They would host JA open houses, have an online portal for subcontractors and vendors, evaluate and select local partners, recruit through UNF Engineering and Construction College a paid project intern, streamline payment processing, and local labor encouraged to reflect the makeup of the community.
Nancy, let me just interrupt you. For people who are watching or observing and may not know the answer to this question, can you please remind us what LSM, WDBE, and JSEB are?
So I'm going to go with the one I remember best first. Jacksonville Small and Emerging Business Program. It's a program of the city that JA also participates. The other is really a combined acronym from everybody's responses. So it's local, small, minority, women, disadvantaged business enterprises.
Great job. Thank you for that.
Jeez, is everybody in there?
And if you would like, I can answer questions along the way, or we'll just continue.
Thank you for that. I'll pause you for a moment and just ask if there are questions from the board. Anything to date on the summary of the presentations? Ms. Johnson? Over New Bill, Ms. Green? Okay, continue. Thank you,
Thank you.
Nancy.
So this is a slide with a little extra detail, but that you've seen before in several board meetings since September. And this is the scoring layout as we proposed for the ITN. In the beginning, we had 2/3 weight on qualitative summary and 1/3 weight on quantitative. We've added the band in the middle, which is a presentation and interview segment. And then the board will have grading at the end of the meeting. So there'll be a total of 760 points, and we've graded up to the 3 categories that would be available, total 660. Next, I'm going to walk through the actual scoring on the qualitative summary.
Let me just interrupt
Okay.
for those following along. There will be copies of this available for distribution at the conclusion of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, on the qualitative criteria, this came from the scoring matrix that we published in the ITN. We're going to reference submittals by the location, but just for everybody to know, I'm going to read the formal name of the company submittals and what we're going to call them in the next several slides. So Jacksonville 1C Parcel 1 Holding Company, LLC, is going to be referred to as Lot J. That's why they're first alphabetically. Kings Avenue Station P3 LLC will be referred to as Kings Avenue. Ryan Companies US Inc. will be referred to as Adams Street. I'm going to go to the summary of the qualitative scoring, but I'm going to read or convey some information about what we were looking for in each category, and you'll be able to hear me give a little overview of each category scores. So on customer engagement, customer center, we were looking for discussion and conceptual layout of the customer center experience, including a welcoming design, thoughtful parking and pedestrian flow, and the ability to engage with the customer. Lot J rated highest in this category with an attached ground level customer center. Kings Avenue was ranked second with a well thought out design, and Adams Street was ranked third. On the building program accommodation, this addressed a lot of the information that we said we wanted in the ITN as far as the elements we needed to include. This category had the highest possible points and included much about the response to the building program needs. It included the revised program to accommodate 760 employees, the efficiency of core, that's the load factor for the real estate folks in the room of usable versus gross square footage, building structural and utility efficiency, utilities in the core, how was the flow around elevator, restroom, utility staff, and security concerns. We were looking for the leads for each discipline on the project team as opposed to the development team. The program readback showing an understanding of the priority of elements, concepts, and solutions such as security, building control systems, redundant power, and amenities, sustainability, environmental responsibility, and parking, both qualitative and quantitative. You'll see in this section that Lot J,
Just a second,
oh,
Nancy.
yes.
Brad, do we have any issue?
I hope not.
Brad?
They're checking to see the validity of the alarm. I suggest we stay here until we hear something in the next one.
Thank you, Ted.
For those who didn't pick up on it, we had a flashing alarm for a systems issue, health, life, safety issue. So we're checking that out. We'll continue pending any further announcement.
I
I'm
hope
sure that's just
not
a
an
coincidence.
indication. In the building program accommodation category, Lot J ranked the highest, Kings Avenue ranked second, and Adams Street ranked third. The next category, we looked for an adequate understanding for JEA programming and interior build to advance JEA's internal culture, the location and amenities offered by each site, and the exterior design as reflected JEA's intent for the future. This is in the workforce engagement culture change category. In this category, Adams Street ranked highest, Kings Avenue second, and Lot J third. On the development schedule business continuity section, we were looking for clear explanation of the early development process, the lead developer's experience in projects of similar scale, especially of corporate office buildings, and detailed project delivery schedules. All the initial responses were a little short in the description of the early development process. They all had good detailed project schedules. So we asked for that information again in the presentation interview section. We'll address that in a bit. Adams Street ranked highest in this category with the most direct corporate office experience and the most detailed schedule. Kings Avenue and Lot J were ranked second with tied scores. On economic development, we were looking for how each location added to downtown development, capital investment, and job creation, retention, and innovative and sustainable solutions. New mixed use and interactive projects were given higher consideration in this category. Lot J rated highest in the category for a full mixed use development. Kings Avenue ranked second with the ability to enhance a lesser mix of uses, and Adams Street ranked third as a standalone development project. On timing, site control, type, and program process, in this category, we were looking for both the lead development team as opposed to the project building team. So the development team's financial ability to expedite the project process, and for demonstration of site control or explanation of how to achieve site control within 90 days of award, as was outlined in the ITN.
Nancy, let me ask you to pause there again.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of information here, and I just want to make sure the board has an opportunity as it's fresh in their mind. We'll have an opportunity to come back with more detailed questions for Nancy's staff and CBRE. But if there are questions that you want clarification on now, I'll just pause and let you ask Nancy now for clarification.
I'll
April?
hold to the end in case those questions
Okay.
are answered along the
Right.
presentation.
Reverend Newbill? Ms. Johnson? Okay. Thank you, Nancy. Please
Thank
continue.
you. In this category, Adams Street and Kings Avenue were tied with the highest scores, and Lot J was third due to a less clear path to site control. Overall, on the qualitative scoring, Adams Street ranked highest at 267 points, Lot J ranked second with 254, and Kings Avenue third with 251. We also then had the presentation interview and the resubmittal submittal of an early development plan. The shortlist firms attended a presentation interview session on January 28th. The purpose was to provide a better understanding of each group's project team and leads, and to ask clarifying questions of each group. Each team demonstrated a commitment to the project by the full team's participation in those sessions. For the presentation portion, Adams Street and Lot J were tied with the highest points, and Kings Avenue was lower. For the interview portion, Adams Street received the highest points, with Lot J second and Kings Avenue with the lower points. All firms submitted their early development plan, and those were scored. They all did a good job, and there was a 1-point difference in those scores, with Adams Street highest, Lot J second, and Kings Avenue third. The next segment will discuss the financial information and the progress.
Attention all employees, disregard the fire alarm, repeat, disregard any fire alarm activation.
We should just stay here. I'm sure this building's fine.
Thank you. We'll next discuss financial information and the progress on the draft lease document. The draft lease contains a construction addendum, additional development allocation responsibility matrix, as I mentioned earlier, and those were provided to each team for review and response.
Attention all employees, please disregard any fire alarm. Again, please disregard any fire alarm activation.
Thank you. The development matrix outlines in detail the component elements of the project and indicates which elements are the responsibility of the developer and what elements are the responsibility of JEA for the tenant improvement and support systems build out. A few of those items are shared responsibility, but we want to stress that the major elements of the overall project are expected to be highly coordinated between the selected developer, their project team, and JEA's project team. The financial analysis from the original responses was updated with the information contained in the best and final offers. Mike Carroll with CBRE will discuss the financial summary, and then following that discussion, David Edwards, JEA's outside real estate counsel, approved by the City's Office of General Counsel, will provide an overview on the lease and construction addendum. Stuart Green will follow from CBRE to discuss location-related elements. Mike?
Thank you, Nancy, and members of the board. CBRE, from the quantitative analysis, started this process back in October and assisted with development of the ITN. Following the submission of the ITN, we received the initial proposals in from all of the respondents. Initially, that was 5. Following that, as you know, we went through the shortlist process, both qualitative and quantitative, and ended up with the 3 proposals that you see here before you today. In our financial analysis, as Nancy indicated, we've looked at it basically on setting up a discounted cash flow analysis using the information that was provided. In the case of this analysis, this would be the best and final proposals. So we took the information that each of the developers responded with in the best and final, and we put those into our model. And that model is comprised of really the biggest piece and the most complex piece, which Stuart Green will address, is construction cost and what is the likely cost of a project like this. All of the cash flows tee off of that building cost, and we use that to develop the cash flow model and arrive at the summary that you see here. We also took the step of leveling this to 190,000 rentable square feet. There were varying differences in each of the proposals as to the rentable square foot proposed. So we made an adjustment to that. Stuart adjusted for the construction impact and used 190,000 square feet going forward on a 15-year lease term. There was one of the proposers that proposed a 20-year term. We disregarded that because the ITN requested a 15-year term. So this is all on a 15-year lease analysis. You see in the second set of second columns there the pre-tax net present value. We looked at that using a discount rate and discounted all of those cash flows back. In that first line, it's net present value of the base rent and parking. So that is exclusive of any assumptions on operating expenses. All of the developers proposed a 2.5% annual increase in that base rent number. So taking again off of the proposed, each of the proposers' proposed rent and rent constant, we developed this cash flow model. And you'll see from that, and this is inclusive of parking, I might add, one of the developers proposed a $45 per month parking charge that is on Lot J. So that's included in this rent schedule. So the numbers are self-evident. After it, net present value basis, Lot J finished at $58,221,000, Kings Avenue at $59,173,000, and Adams Street at $61,763,000. The next line is the net present value of the total occupancy cost. So on this particular cash flow model, we layered in the expected cost of operating expenses. All of the developers gave us an operating expense budget, net of utility cost, and we made certain assumptions on that, escalating those expenses annually, and as well as real estate taxes. So that last line, net present value of total occupancy cost, does include operating expenses, which is an estimate, and the parking cost associated with Lot J. The final set of lines there is the total occupancy cost, and again, this was a pre-tax occupancy cost, which was inclusive of all the operating expenses, parking cost, and escalations. You can see there the numbers, are $132,425,000 for Lot J, $139,671,000 for Kings Avenue, and $139,531,000 for Adams Street. There were slight differences in the operating expenses that were proposed by each of the respondents, so that's why you see a bit of a variance there. It was due to their estimates, not ours, of the operating expenses. In the last line, we have provided you with an annual average total occupancy cost. So that just gives you, the members of the board, an idea of the rent and expenses that JEA would incur under each of these scenarios.
Thank you, Mike. Again, I'll just ask you to pause. Were any questions for clarification from Mike's presentation on the quantitative revenue bill? Ms. Green, Ms. Johnson?
I do have a clarification. On the net present value, total occupancy, you said that did or did not include real estate tax?
On the total occupancy, it does include real estate
Okay.
taxes in each proposal.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Edwards?
Thank you. As Nancy mentioned, we provided the three developers with a draft lease for their review and comment. The lease has two primary parts. The first part is the lease for the building itself once it's completed, and then a construction addendum which addresses such issues as the design process for the building, establishing a maximum cost, and the actual construction of the building. Admittedly, our draft lease was a complex document, about 65 pages, and it did have provisions that were protective of the JEA. We tasked the developers with providing revisions to the lease in the hope of seeing how far apart we would be by the time of best and final offer. In the materials, we've prepared 2 pages which address the currently outstanding issues on the leases. We identified the issues for each lease. We tried to weigh the importance of each issue and summarize those in a certain form. And these pages break down those summaries and give us numbers as far as outstanding issues. If you look at the page in your presentation, there's a chart at the top that is generally intended to identify material issues. The top line in the column are generally issues that we feel would be important to continue to discuss to try to make some progress. The second line, major lease issues, are those issues from the top line that we feel like we would recommend making a change or progress before signing a final lease. Now, these charts are intended mainly to show a comparison of progress among the developers, not exactly a definitive list of number of issues, but this hopefully will give you an indication of where we are. Below that, for each of the leases, we've identified some of the outstanding issues in kind of general format and summarized beneath them. And if you take a look, it looks Adams Street has fewer outstanding issues and is closer to a final and acceptable lease than the other respondents. They were timely in responding, and they were agreeable to many of our requirements and language in the lease. If you move to the next page, similar for the construction addendum summary, similar process. Again, we've got Adams Street with fewer issues outstanding identified. In this case, Kings Avenue is showing fewer issues than Lot J as well. So while we generally believe that when you reach business terms with someone and proceed forward with an agreement, the legal language is going to follow and we're going to come to terms, but we have to say that the other 2 respondents are farther apart. We see some more risk in coming to terms, and accordingly, from a risk standpoint, we feel like it will be a less time-consuming and a more likely process that we would come to terms with Adams Street.
Point of clarification, in identifying the open issues here, this is after some back and forth response, not just the initial response from each bidder?
Some back and forth, some more back and forth with others, depending on how quickly they submitted their initial revisions and responded back on those initial revisions.
Okay. Other questions or clarification, Revenue Bill?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to know if any of these numbers has changed since publishing this.
No, we,
significantly? I mean,
well, we cut off the changes at best and final offer.
Okay,
So this is as a best and final offer. We decided that to keep negotiating after that point would, may not be fair to some respondents who had already done their best.
thank you.
Thank you.
Any other points of clarification on the lease and construction addendum, Ms. Green?
I'd like an example of a significant outstanding issue versus a major issue.
So a
Since they're not all listed here.
Right, and we did do all that breakdown. I would say a significant outstanding issue is timing to consent to a change in, if we want to make a change in the building, or an implied consent issue, timing for us to deliver an estoppel, form of estoppel, subordination provisions with the lender, things that we think we'll come to terms with, we would hope. They're probably not deal breakers, but things that we still want to work out. I would say more major issues are things that are going to impact our use of the building and our ability to continue use, such if there was a casualty, a hurricane came through and damaged the building, the timing that the landlord would have to repair the casualty, or for us to be able to possibly step in and do the work ourselves, or even have a termination right if we wanted to move on if it was just taking too long. So those issues were better on some of that than others, but we feel like we need to do some work there. There could be cost issues, such as the operating expenses are going to be passed through to the JEA, and we had wanted to have some control on those expenses, place a cap or a ceiling on issues such as the controllable operating expenses. And we're in different positions on the leases on that, and we feel like that control is important, so we would keep trying to work on that, depending on who gets awarded.
Thank you.
Just further point of clarification. I assume that the categories of major issues is the same for all bidders, and you were counting which bidder ticked off a major issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was some commonality there. We categorized if it was a major issue for somebody, it was a major issue for another. But
Thank you.
I should probably clarify that. If someone said we have 24 months to repair the building, and someone else said we had 270 days, the issue, it's a little gray area. So,
Fair enough.
but generally, we apples to apples.
Any other clarifications? Again, we'll come back and revisit each of these presentations in detail during the Q&A period. Any other clarifications? Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Who's going to talk about milestones? Mr. Green.
believe I will. Okay, what is before you? The top three lines are JEA's dates, okay? They are leveled for each player, and they will represent what will be a condition of award. Between the top line and the middle, the negotiations start, negotiations end is 60 days. There'll be some critical milestones there that we'll expect back from whomever we're working with. And then another 60 days from negotiations end to team kickoff. So total of 120 days. So that's leveled by JEA. The items in orange are specific values given to us from the various respondents. And they're key milestones, obviously. So shell start, TI start, tenant improvement start, and shell substantial completion. You can kind of see where the math leads you in the various lines. And then JEA prescribed 10 months for our tenant improvements, which will start at the middle line. The TI start, the middle orange line, that's where our tenant improvements would start, so that's where that 10 months would begin. And so if you go through that, and you'll see in a previous slide that that Lot J, there's about 35 months from shell start to occupancy. Kings Avenue, there's 29 months, and Adams Street, there is 25 months. Keep in mind, we're early in program, okay? So there are still a few moving parts. These durations may change by a few months, but so allow yourself some flexibility and judgment. But for the most part, that's where the respondent's information is taking us. So.
Any question regarding clarifying this data? Thank you, Mr. Green. Raj?
You want to do the garage?
No, I'd like you to.
Okay. All right. So the garage metrics are effectively in front of you. The Lot J is intended to build a 3,000 space garage and assign 850 spaces to JEA. Kings Avenue has an existing garage from which they will assign 850 spaces. And Adams Street will build a new garage that will have a total of 850 spaces. The JEA spaces to total spaces, you can see from the math, the cost of those are factored differently. In Lot J's example, they're $45 per space per month. In both Kings Avenue and Adams Street, they're both included in the rent in different ways. Obviously, Kings Avenue has a garage, and Adams Street has to build one, so there's a capital play and there's a lease play, but that's how those are taken care of. And then controlled or shared, obviously the two garages that are not entirely ours are shared. In Adams Street case, that is completely controlled by JEA, which beckons the next line, which is complete security control by JEA, and an asset at the end of your lease. You would have one in Adams Street, and you would have the rights in both Kings Avenue and Lot J. So it's not like the parking spaces go away. You still have those rights, but it's just a different value we prescribe for those. And then estimated costs by third parties or development outside of JEA lease. Lot J, obviously, there's a $40 to $45 million cost to accomplish that outside of the lease. And in Kings Avenue, garage is there, $0 cost. And then in Adams Street, we're obviously spending the money to build that garage. So that's a capital play.
And Mr. Green, let me just flag for everyone your footnote that despite the disparity or the variety of solutions to the garage, they were all normalized and included in the financial analysis.
That is correct.
Okay. Any questions clarifying the garage metrics? Okay, thank you. Dependencies.
So dependencies, what CBRE tries to evaluate in the beginning of every development is the time frame from award until your building can go vertical. And when your building can go vertical, you've obviously got your design done, you've bought out most of the trades, you understand most of the costs. The risk footprint significantly drops by that point. However, during the interim time frame, there are typically a set number of dependencies that control your ability to get that building out of the ground. Okay, and that's kind of what we're trying to evaluate here. We're not. It's a binary evaluation. It's either a risk or it is not a risk, and we're not trying to scale it or subject probability into that relationship. We don't really want to pollute any of that. It's just it either it is or it isn't there. And it should be noting we're not evaluating the consultants or the builders. You guys are blessed with 3 very capable teams, so that's the good news. We're also not really evaluating the developer per se, except on a few line items that I'll mention. We are trying to evaluate the location attributes, okay? And the information we've gotten from the respondents. How complete is it? How complete is it? So those are what we're trying to evaluate. The team came up, and there was no wavering whatsoever. This evaluation, you'll see, it was unanimous by everybody on the team. So if you'll go to the scoring. So the various dependencies. The first one is financing, okay? Adams Street provided a guarantee by their corporate, and Lot J, we don't have concerns from a finance standpoint. Kings Avenue, we do. We think it may be dependent on JEA's credit. So there's some concern there, and that is a risk. Land control. Kings Avenue has it. The other two do not. So pretty easy to subscribe there. Land viability. This refers to our ability to get the building out of the ground without doing anything else. Let's exclude remediation for a second. So typically it would include demolition, removing heavy utilities, anything like that. And from that aspect, both Kings Avenue and Adams are clean sites. Lot J does have some work to do. Remediation. Again, we do know Lot J from their response does have remediation. Kings Avenue has nothing. Adams Street has a groundwater issue, no remediation. It's a monitoring issue, so it shouldn't be a dependent activity. And I would subject that land viability and remediation, keep in mind, those two things may be solved financially in Cordish's case. So I'm not speaking to finances there. And those two issues can probably be resolved during our early programming and design phase, okay? So that by the time we want to go vertical, they're out of the way. But until they're out of the way, they're not out of the way. So they're a condition precedent to us starting vertical construction. Lease progress. As David's review suggested, Lot J and Kings Avenue are significantly behind Ryan, and that is in and of itself a risk. Planning and approvals. Both Lot J and Adams Street have some approvals over and above what Kings Avenue have. I don't think they're substantial in most cases. For instance, DDRB, we're able to get through that very quickly, but until it's out of the way, it's a risk. So Lot J and Adams Street have that risk. The garage, as we've talked about, Kings Avenue has one. The other two don't. Despite the fact that Cordish may be able to come out of Lot J and Ryan may be able to come out of Adams Street quickly with a garage, until it's built, it's a risk. And then finally, the body of the work that occurred from ITN submission to award, or to today, really. Well, till best and final, sorry, March the 11th. That effort, that responsiveness, the completeness of that responsiveness, speaks to, we find, typically what you're going to get in your teammate going forward. If they were complete and very progressive with their solutions and trying to move the ball down the field and complete in their response, we've found that that's the same manner of athlete you're going to get downstream. So it's an important character, as they all are, and we judge it. So with that said, Lot J and Kings Avenue did a good job. I would say Adams Street really went above and beyond. And so if you look at the total score there, obviously Lot J scores at the most dependencies, and Kings Avenue and Adams Street are tied at 3.
Let me just stop you right there, Mr. Green. I see dependency and I see a 4-letter word that translates to risk for me. Is that an unfair characterization?
No,
Okay.
it's not.
And just your previous slide setup, just to reemphasize, this doesn't have any scaling or any probability analysis. This is not a scalpel but a hammer?
Correct.
Okay. Any questions of clarification on the dependency/risk metrics? Okay.
I do have
Ms.
a quick
Jones.
question. You when you were going through land viability, and you had said there's work to do. Can you tell me specifically, like what you just did general characterization, but
Sure. There are some utilities under the footprint that Lot J is subscribing for your building. To be specific, we know that there is a 30-inch steel line that you guys have sitting underneath that building. And if you look at the connectors of that line, it's about a 3-block run that we have to build and then shut down. So
and for point of clarification, the point of that dependency and risk is that that estimation hasn't been determined, and so that's not a part of the cost as of right now.
No, I'm not speaking to that. They may have it solved outside of JEA's cost. We're not sure of that. They've spoken a little bit to that. We haven't gotten into details of what they've included outside of JEA's cost. But until it's moved,
Sure.
it's a risk.
Yes. On that point, with Lot J, and you said there was some timeline within which to address some of the land control viability remediation issues.
Sure.
Can you expound on that? Is it outside of or within the timeline that's been presented in the best and final?
It is. Let's take remediation as the example. So Cordish has applied 3 months for that remediation to occur. It sits in the middle of what is really a 10-month programming and early design phase. So you've got float on the building side for them to have issues. You're not totally up against your building, so we think that they can resolve that in the time prescribed. But as most people know, until we start digging in the dirt, it's a risk.
So even if it took twice as long as they budgeted, it's a parallel path that doesn't run up against the next milestone.
That's our understanding.
Okay, thank you. So that's the presentation. Anything to add to that, Nancy?
No, sir.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask Ms. Terrell, Mr. Green, and Ms. Kilgo to stay with us. So if you turn back to your agenda, we're going to take comments and questions from the public. Then we'll have an opportunity for an in-depth Q&A by the board, rehashing all of this information and answering all your questions that you may have of staff and of CBRE and of the bidders. So bidder representatives are present in the room today. If you have questions of the bidders, at least I've seen 2 of the 3. Is there a Ryan representative back there? Thank you, Ryan. So we have representatives from all of the bidders that will also be available to answer questions that the board may have as well. Then we'll move into a review of the board scoring methodology. So first, I'd like to take comments from the public. They've had an opportunity to review the best and final offers that were published last week. They've now heard the ranking and analysis from staff and from CBRE. And I've only got 2 cards. One is from Sarah Boren. Is Ms. Boren present? If you come to the lectern, please. Give your name and address.
Hello, my name is on.
Good enough.
My name's Sarah Boren. I represent U.S. Green Building Council Florida. Our address is 40 East Adams Street in the LEED Gold Jesse Ball DuPont Center, just down the street. I am here today to strongly urge the board to seek LEED certification at a gold or platinum level for its headquarters, as well as if you go with the project that builds a parking lot to go Park Smart, which is a green building rating system for parking garages at a gold or platinum level. The City of Jacksonville Sustainable Building Ordinance 2009-11 requires all public buildings to certify under a third-party green building rating system. Leadership in Energy Environmental Design, or LEED, is the proven market leader in holistic, healthy, high-performing green building rating systems in the U.S. and internationally in 167 countries. Its ROI are proven on financial savings, including operations and maintenance, higher productivity, increased employee morale, less absenteeism, increased resiliency. There are a lot more resiliency points now in there, and many more statistics that have been proven over and over. It is really important as our local utility to be a leader and a visible model of the best practices in energy and water efficiency and design. LEED achieves this visibility and performance. This building will be one of your best education tools for your customers, both residential and commercial. So thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Boren. I appreciate your comments. As you may have noted, each of the bidders proposed LEED's qualification to at silver and one at gold level. And we echo your enthusiasm. We certainly recognize here at JEA the importance of serving as a role model for our community. As you may know, environmental value is one of our four core values here. I also have a card from Mr. Belanky. Mr. Belanky, we'll have an opportunity for each of the bidders to present. Will you agree to defer until your time? I will. Thank you very much. So now we'd like to delve into the thorough, some would say exhaustive, Freudian slip, presentation and work product from staff and CBRE, and give each of the board members an opportunity to question them in depth. I know I have a lot of questions. And then we'll direct questions to each of the bidders. So first, questions for staff and CBRE. I always start revenue, but I'm going to start with Ms. Johnson this time, but that's only because she used to sit over there.
Thank you.
And now she sits here.
I switched it up on you.
You did.
I actually already asked my question about the risk in the utilities. One amounts to the lease, and I'm gonna find my place here. You had areas where you distinguished the difference between significant issues versus major issues.
Yes.
And am I understanding you correctly? And basically, these major issues, given that there's time to address them, but they're deal breakers for us and as we position ourselves.
I would think that each of these major issues, we do the best we could and then present to the board and let the board make that decision. But I think we would like to make progress on the major issues before we, what I don't want to do is come back to the board with the same lease and say, well, we still have all these major issues. Is it okay with you? So yes, they're important to try to make progress on.
Let me interrupt, Ms. Johnson, for just one moment. Make sure the board understands that the resolution we'll be voting on today is to authorize final negotiations with the highest ranked bidder to arrive at a lease with a construction addendum, which would come back to the board for approval. So we'll have a second bite at the apple to approve the lease that's negotiated by staff and outside counsel. So if that wasn't clear, I want to make sure that's clear for everyone. I'm sorry, Ms. Johnson, please.
My last question is, Stuart, for the looking at the garage metrics with the 40 to 45 million for Lot J, explain that to me. Estimated cost by third parties.
Yeah, so that's a floor level cost for a 3,000 space garage. Okay, if you were to estimate it at a unit basis, it's a fairly aggressive number to get there, to get to the 40 to 45 million. So that's why we call it a floor. But that's what it's going to cost to build that garage at the minimum.
Okay. And so if I'm understanding the overall assessment from the previous question that I asked about land viability, that's in connection with the garage and the utilities that we're going to have to deal with in that whole process of pulling all this together. Is that accurate?
I'm sorry, what's your question?
So basically, the question that I asked previously, and then also the funds that you'll need for building the garage in itself and the potential risk factors that we have with the utilities, not knowing that cost, and then having this cost is what will ultimately be combined into the risk factor.
Well, the risk is that you have to get a garage built and you have to move the utilities. Cordish may have solved for that risk financially outside of our capital investment.
Which
So,
we don't know.
so JEA wouldn't be, I don't think would be paying for either one of those. And we've kind of confirmed that to some degree, certainly in the garage's case. We're not paying to build the garage. So financially, it's taken care of, I think, elsewhere, most of that is.
Okay.
But until it's a built garage and no utilities, those are risks.
Well, you'll have other opportunities. Ms. Green.
From the time schedule, the difference between the bidders, 25 months, 29 months, 35 months, is any of that tied to land acquisition, acquiring the land?
I don't think it is. We've been through some pretty detailed schedules with them, with all the respondents. I can tell you that you've got a programming exercise to occur. Okay, that's going to take no less than a month. And then you've got to design the building, which is going to take no less than probably 7 months, 8 months, 9 months. So you've got a 10-month activity in the beginning, in Cordish's case, where you can solve for land control. but it still has to occur in there, and keep in mind, we've got to execute a lease during that time, and somebody's going to be at risk at some point spending money towards design before we have land control, theoretically.
So if there's time to address the land control during that time, what is the extended time? Why is their time so much longer?
Does it change this timeline? Is that the question?
Yeah, it changes to 35 months versus the other two being 29 and 25.
Right. Largely, in Cordish's case, they are almost 2 years before we get to start TIs. And I think through negotiations, we can work that well upstream. But I would say that's the biggest impact. If you look at, we give them a kickoff at 7/31 of 19, and our TIs can't start until 8/29 of 21. So that's a pretty long time. And keep in mind, if they start the building at 8/14 of 20, then they've been building the building for 12 months before our TIs can start. We would hope to pull that upstream by as much as 4 months.
Okay. You mentioned that you had to level the playing field with the rentable square feet. Was there because there was additional space, green space? I think I remember one of the proposals about a rooftop space.
Yes. Yes, that's why we did that.
Okay. And you also mentioned that the operating expenses were determined by them. Were there a lot of differences between the three?
There were, in the case of Kings Avenue, theirs were higher. At what they quoted net of utilities was $9 per square foot, and that was on the order of from the other two $1.50 to almost $2 difference per square foot. But again, keep in mind, operating expenses are estimates, and with changes in insurance costs, all the other variable expenses. It's kind of a moving target, but that operating expense assumptions that we made, we took off of the actual operating expense budgets that they provided, and then we made assumptions on how those expenses might grow over time.
Thank you, Ms. Green. Reverend Newbill.
I'm fine.
Let me follow up, thank you, sir. Let me follow up on a question that Ms. Green, I looked at the marked up leases, and I don't recall, did any of the bidders include in their operating costs the CAM type charges for, I guess I'm speaking specifically to the bids of Lot J and Kings Avenue, for other operating expenses beyond the building footprint in the garage? Don't recall, but maybe I missed it.
I don't believe they did. I mean, the level of detail in the lease, some redefined operating expenses to be every expense associated with the operation of the building, and of course
Right.
we're going to want to drill down on that, and that's one of our kind of major issues. But nobody called out that specifically. I can remember something outside the building permit that we would have to participate in.
Okay. I have a couple of other questions, and I don't particularly care who jumps in with the answers here. Are we comfortable, Nancy, that all of the bids met all of the ITN requirements?
Yes, sir.
And on access, I seem to remember, we didn't get to it in the slide, there's a slide at the end of this deck that talks about access for our customers. Board members will recall we had a question, and I was shocked by Ms. Stewart's answer as to the number of customers that actually physically come to JEA and pay their bill each month, or otherwise have an in-person visit with JEA. I see that Ryan's Adams Street is right in the heart of access. Are we comfortable, or did the bidders address access at the other locations for our customers who might, for example, rely on mass transit, public transit?
They did, and if we could get the PowerPoint back up about the place we had it before, we do have a transit map in the presentation that we'll project in a minute. That was asked of each group from the initial responses. Kings Avenue and Adams Street provided
It's slide 26.
a detailed location walkability exhibit in their initial proposal that showed kind of amenities and transit locations. Since some of the information in Lot J talked about the large mixed-use development, what they expected to be there, there is an existing bus route on A. Philip Randolph now within about a block of where the site would be. Pardon me. Kings Avenue is by one of the JTA hubs, as you know, the big garage is there, the Skyway is there. They've got a bus transit station adjacent to that site, and then Ryan's site on Adams is fairly near the current hub, but I think JTA is planning to move that a little further into La Villa, the the exchange area.
Is that headed to where the new JTA headquarters?
I
Anybody know?
do not know for sure.
Councilman, do you know if the hub is being relocated to the new JTA headquarters?
I believe so, but I would, yeah.
Don't quote you on it.
Well, I know it's leaving,
Yeah.
State Street, so I'm pretty sure if I recall the recent, presentation by JTA, they are moving it there.
Does anybody in the audience know? Not above asking. Carrie, do you know? Who knows? Where it's going to move to? It will be adjacent to the new JTA? Thank you. Okay. I have a question that's been raised and I think answered in your supplementary slides, but for the benefit of the public. All of the proposed sites are outside, is it Zone B, or either in Zone B or Zone C for evacuation purposes?
So, let me get
27.
that map.
It's the
So
other way.
in the evacuation zones, both Kings and Lot J are in evacuation zone B. The current JA facility and Adams are in zone C,
Slightly higher.
slightly higher.
So just for those who aren't looking at the slide, it's actually slide 27. In a Cat 2 event, everything's dry. In a Cat 3 event, you could expect to see 0 to 5 feet at Kings Avenue, 3 to 5 feet at Lot J. Cat 4 goes up, and in fact, Adams Street would get wet at Cat 4.
And I'm
Those are
gonna,
scary slides. That all
they
that
are.
knows.
So this is Cat 1. I'll just flip through them for the benefit of the audience. We start getting a little wet. Everybody's still okay. When we get to Cat 3 and 4, you'll see that a lot of stuff is underwater. JA has a standing readiness plan, and if we are expecting above a Cat 2 hurricane, we will already have plans in place to move to our hardened, and it's a
Off-site
lease
EOC.
facility, off-site EOC. We would do that until damage was assessed or storm water's received. We don't want to risk having to move in the middle of an event. We decided not to build a Cat 5 rated full corporate office building due to the expense.
Cost prohibitive.
Yes, sir. And so the plan is the one that we have in place now, depending on what's expected, we would go to the off-site EOC and then move back into the main corporate building when we knew we could get there safely and the building would function.
Did any of the bidders' plans, if you're building on the ocean, people build up and have sort of a breakaway so that there's no damage to the main structure of the home? Did any of the bidders address first floor in their plans?
Not that I'm aware, but Stuart might have had subsequent conversations.
He's furrowing his brow now.
I'm sorry?
I said you're furrowing your brow.
Well, yeah, we haven't gotten that far structurally.
Okay.
There's some options that they can prescribe, but we haven't gotten there yet.
That's fine. I noticed in reviewing the best and final offers that there is a dramatic disparity in the contingency amounts in the various budgets. So Ryan had 5.6%, 3.7 million. Cordish had 3.4%, 1.9 million. Kings Avenue had 6.5 million. Is that, what am I missing there? Does that speak to the bidders or the project, or just their attitude towards contingency funds? I'm just curious, do you have a take on that?
Well,
And is that the right level? Should we be asking for higher contingency?
we should. We
Okay.
should. They included the contingency that they are comfortable with. CBRE would and has recommended nothing less than 10% of a prescribed program. So if our program costs us $75 million, that'd be $7.5 million. And we have adjusted all the numbers to include $7.5 million in contingency.
Was that in your early slide analysis, the normalized?
No, it wasn't, but when we went through the numbers, there were a couple of things that needed to adjust from their numbers to our prescribed numbers. One of them is right setting at 190,000 square feet, for instance.
Right.
Another one is adjusting for contingency.
Is that reflected in the scoring that staff and CBRE compiled, the sort of quantitative scoring here, or qualitative scoring, rather? The contingency?
I don't think.
So we used two scores off the sheet that Mike Carroll talked about. They were the two line items that we used to evaluate the original proposals, and then we took those same line items from best and final and replaced. So Mike will tell us if the adjusted contingency is in NPV of total occupancy costs. That's one of the lines. The third line on that sheet, and then the fifth line, the average annual occupancy costs. And I do not think those were adjusted for contingency.
They were not.
They were not, because
Contingency
we
rate.
didn't want to restate their numbers.
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me make one other point that I failed to do before. In those cash flow analysis, each of the developers proposed, both in the ITN and in the best and final, a tenant improvement allowance of $75 per square foot. So that is included in the cash flows. It shows up as a credit, actually, to each. The assumption is that the developer will provide that allowance to JEA. JEA will spend it. So that is in there.
So we didn't add the enhanced contingency there
We did not.
in any of these numbers. But you intend to include that as part of the negotiation to the highest ranking bidder?
Downstream, correct.
Downstream, okay, thank you. I am struck, and maybe others were and just didn't say it, by the fact that out of 660 points, the three bids came in within, 8 and basically 36 points of one another.
Yeah,
How'd that happen?
looked at that too.
It's like really close.
Like I said, you have three very good respondents.
Okay. We talked, someone asked, and we talked for a bit about Lot J's subsurface issues and remediation concerns. That I don't think that turned up in your dependencies as a risk for the other two sites. Are we aware of any remediation risks for Kings Avenue and Adams Street or other subsurface conditions?
We're not. Adams Street has a groundwater issue that we know we'll have to monitor, and we looked at that several years ago, and we think we understand what that is. It does not require any formal remediation per se of merit. And Kings Avenue we understand to be a clean site.
Thank you. Maybe back to Mr. Edwards. David, did the operating expenses include anything related to the garages? Maybe you already answered this because it hadn't been finalized yet.
We are assuming that they will include garage expenses, but it hasn't been finalized yet to know. And we're still looking at trying to apply a cap to one of our respondents, make sure that's going to happen.
Okay. And maybe this is to each of the parties standing here, the CBRE staff and Mr. Edwards. CBRE, you guys do this all the time. You do dozens of these, including for municipalities and other municipal quasi-governmental entities. That's your job. We as a board don't do that. We have other careers. We sit here as volunteers. We don't have the depth of expertise that you guys have and that you put to work on our behalf, for which we're grateful. And Nancy, you've spent the last 4 years of your life living with this. And David, of course, you do lease negotiations day in and day out. What is the biggest risk that this board needs to be concerned about? Because we're looking at a lot of information, a lot of data. I spent a lot of time over the weekend and last night and this morning trying to make sure that I was fully informed to make a good decision for JEA and its customers. But what's the big risk here? You guys didn't highlight. I appreciate your dependencies list, but what's the big risk that we need to be concerned about? CBRE?
You go first. I think the biggest thing you guys need to select is the best team member, the best athlete out there. Okay, there are certainly risks in those dependencies, and that's a concern. But you're picking a teammate, and you need to make sure that you can play on the field with that teammate and solve problems, big problems. We're going to have obstacles, and keep the ball moving downfield.
Picking the right team.
Picking the right team.
Not necessarily the right location, but the right team.
The right team.
Nancy, do you have thoughts?
Yes, I agree with Stuart, but I'd also add that all of these solutions are good solutions for JEA. I think everybody's done a great job. It's, in some ways, what does JEA want to be? Core downtown, new development, or part of an existing development that's expanding, and what's best for employee base and the city, and more especially what helps with our business continuity and long-term future. So that's a lot of pieces, not just one. But I can see merit in every solution, and maybe timing is the big one for me on the back end.
Timing.
To be able to get to the decision and get going.
Well, perhaps more than other board members, I'm down here a lot, and I ride the elevator, and certainly all the other employees of JEA who work in this building think that timing is a big issue. Not that the building is inherently unsafe, but it is certainly degrading. I think we had 2 major flood events in the last 30 days where the entire floors were unable to work. You heard the alarms that went off earlier today. I take it that wasn't an unusual occurrence. So I want to point out that there is a cost to staying in this building. I don't know that that point has been made. So every day we stay in this building, there's an incremental cost. So the timelines that Ms. Green was asking about are certainly important. Who can deliver us to our move-in date the fastest? I'll come back to you in a moment, David. Reverend Newbill?
Yeah, I think I've asked this question before. Let me ask it again. I know that Ryan is totally design build, under one umbrella, and then the other 2 are not design build under one umbrella, but they have partners in those pieces. So, what are the pros and cons, or the risks, or are there any, in terms of having control by one company, or the other company is having partners that are actually separate from the contractor?
Sure.
And so
on. So, from an executive level, I don't think you're losing anything by going in either direction. In a design build case, you've got some advantages of consistency of conversation, that dialogue that happens within one company. You need to control the fox watch in the hen house a little bit. In the other two, you've got two powerful teammates on both design and construction. They've worked with each other a lot, and the Fox Hidden, I mean, they're both watching out for JEA value. So I don't think you lose anything in either direction.
So who will we have inside as it relates to whether it is the foundation or, as the building is developed and built, do we have anybody inside, or are we just depending on those whom we partner with to do the building?
You want to put your own fox in the hen house?
Yes.
Yes.
So, Reverend Newbill, I'll answer that. That is why we engaged CBRE in the beginning when we thought we were going to do a self-build, and that we engaged Stuart Green as our owner's representative, and he manages these construction projects and tenant build-outs. That's really what he does for his job, and we selected their firm through an RFP for him to help us with this process.
Thank you. That's a good answer. Satisfied.
Ms. Green?
I'd like to hear the financial risk.
Oh, and I'm sorry, financial and lease. Thank you for reminding me.
And thank you for that question. I think the differences in the occupancy costs, the life cycle cost, over a 15-year term are fairly insignificant. There's millions of dollars, but we think through the process of Stuart's side of the house doing a little more value engineering, JEA getting more efficient with the use of the space, perhaps giving a fresh look at your parking requirement, that those total building costs could recede, and that could more than make up for any differences you see in the total occupancy costs now over a 15-year term. So I think that risk is fairly minimal. I would not expect to see the cost go up. I guess I agree with Stuart that to me the risk is a risk of experience. And I think clearly one of the proposers, this is a requirement like this is right in their wheelhouse, and they're very experienced at delivering a solution like JEA is seeking.
Who are you talking about?
Ryan Company's proposal.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Edwards, can you speak to the risk that you see with each of the three bidders in your lease negotiation?
Well, I was just going to add to what significant issues will impact lease negotiations, and I think that financial capability is definitely a factor in lease negotiations. Financial strength seems to solve lease issues in some instances. For example, we're requesting that the landlords escrow the entire amount of the tenant improvement money, which is a big dollar amount. With financial capability, one of our respondents said, okay. We thought we'd have to get in some involved situation where we have a three-party agreement with the lender and that sort of thing. So, and I think it also dictates flexibility. If you're looking at a financeable lease that is dependent upon the JEA as the tenant, your leases can have less flexibility as far as termination rights, assignability, those kind of things. Hopefully they never come into play, but if they do, it's nice to have that flexibility. So I think financial capability is a determining factor with the lease negotiations and the overall viability of the project. So.
Is there a particular lease risk that you think, lease, not T, lease risk, that you think we need to be attuned to from the negotiations you've had to date with the three bidders?
Well, right now, a fair amount of things in the lease and the construction addendum are left open to discussion. So it's hard to handicap that, when you don't say, okay, this could be a huge issue. If they're saying open discussion.
Well, but you did handicap it. You handicapped somebody as being much less of a risk. Adam Street.
We did.
Yeah.
We did. So, for example, the Lot J construction addendum primarily said that this needs to be discussed, and then many of the subsequent paragraphs had an additional need to discuss. So that's a concern when you have that document kind of open-ended at this point. So, we like to think that, and excuse the baseball analogy, but the initial drafts you received.
Well, your head football analogy, so baseball.
So I think one of our participants ended up with their initial draft on second base, and the others are on first base. And as far as getting the
Who ended up
lease
on second base?
home, Ryan.
Right, okay.
And as far as getting it all resolved and done, we have a little more confidence that we'll get all the way around, but the others, we're not ruling that out, of course.
Sure, because you haven't had the same level of negotiation back and forth, maybe?
That's a fair amount of it. You know, the first meeting with Ryan to talk about the lease, which was shortly after the draft was provided, Ryan provided a fully redlined lease, and because they had that, we were able to have more substantive conversations, and then they were able to provide a further redline a few days later. So,
Okay. Other questions about either Mr. Harrell's financial analysis or Mr. Edwards' lease analysis? Ms. Johnson? I wanted to go, please.
Let me go back to the parking, because there was a $45 a space at Lot J, whereas the others, it's included in the rent. So for JEA employees, is there a personal cost to them, or is all of that wrapped up in the building?
So currently, and I may have to have help from my colleagues behind me, in the two JA garages, we do have a parking charge for our employees at the JA garages. But the cost of the Lot J per space was added to these total financials. And we'll have to decide as a company whether we charge an employee parking amount for the spaces that we have assigned to us, but we do now.
You do have a cost
Yes,
associated?
sir. If you park in the JA garage, we do have a monthly amount
Okay.
that we pay.
All right.
So just to recap, all of the financial analyses incorporate the garage costs.
Yes,
So we
sir.
saw that in the summary, but we as a company, JEA as a utility, may elect to impose a surcharge to their employees to encourage ride share or, people riding together or using mass transit or bicycling or walking. Yeah.
And I think the real estate people at the table would like me to say, as are what we know are embedded costs in the Kings Avenue proposal and in Lot J, and the current JA rates are highly discounted off market rates.
Okay, thank you. Other questions, Revenue Bill?
No, I'm fine. Thank
Ms.
you.
Johnson? I want to go back to a couple of the qualitative, I'm sorry, this is taking a lot of time, but it's really important stuff. The qualitative scores, so I'm back on, 11 and 12 of the deck. Several of the bidders came in very close in the scoring on categories, but there were a couple of outliers, and I wonder if you could educate the board, either Nancy from staff's perspective or Stuart or Mike from CBRE's perspective, as to what the basis, just so the board has an understanding of what the basis of these larger discrepancies might be. And I'll just start at the top. So Lot J's got the full point award. In fact, I think the only full point award on the board for customer engagement. I was just curious, what is in their plans that is so engaging?
So part of it is just the thought of the design that they have a ground floor level, separate customer center, easily walkable, approachable. So they clearly had kind of set the customer out. And the balance of the building is multi-story. And they showed a couple of different ways to lay that out. Again, in the Kings Avenue, their ground floor layout, the flow for customers to come, park, etc., was also laid out very well. Ryan, or the Adams Street, just had less detail in their ground floor layout, and that's what we were looking for.
Okay, Thank you for that. And then the opposite side of the scale, the big outlier, 25-point delta in favor of Adams Street Ryan for the workforce engagement and culture. What made their presentation in that regard so dramatic?
So we specifically asked for an exhibit that showed transit, location walkability, like nearby restaurants, amenities, that sort of thing. We got very strong exhibits from both Adams and Kings Avenue. We had beautiful exhibits from Lot J on all their proposed uses, but not much detail about what's there because it's not there. However, this is also an area where we looked at the DIA boundary versus outside, and we said DIA boundary was preferred, so Lot J gets more points there. Kings Avenue is just outside the DIA boundary, but close and offered several other things. So there was just a balance between those three areas, kind of employee culture. What does the site bring today? Location walkability, and then the exterior designs.
Okay. You please interrupt me if you have additional questions. And then a similar question as the development schedule, which also tilted heavily in favor of the Ryan Adams Street proposal. And I guess I was curious about that because it also requires going through a DDRB and DIA on development schedule. Kings Avenue doesn't.
So on the development process, this is where I said in my earlier notes that nobody answered this, even the ones not on the short list, the development process very well in the initial proposal. They gave a project schedule, but not an understanding of the steps to get on early development. So we asked for that again later. Experience, we were relying heavily on corporate office experience, and we were looking for that experience from the development team, the prime development team, not their partners, not the GCs, not the architects, etc. And then the detailed project schedule.
Okay. And I think I understand the weighting in favor of Lot J on economic development. That's pretty obvious to me. Any other questions for either Mr. Edwards, Ms. Kilgo, Mr. Green, or Mr. Harrell? The next thing we will do is pose questions to the bidders and hear from them. Anything else? Like, we may call you back up here. Don't think you're all
fine.
please don't leave. So I'd like to just ask for each of the bidders that are present to respond to questions from the board. And I'll take a prerogative of the chair and say, I'd like to hear three things from each of the bidders. I'd like to hear from each bidder the greatest risk that you have in meeting the timeline and development of your submitted bid. I'd like to hear what you disagree with that you've heard today from the board or from the staff and CBRE. If there's something you disagree with, tell us what that is. I don't know, maybe they got it wrong. And third, I'd like to hear why this board should select you as the highest ranking bidder. So I'd like to hear that from each of the bidders. I'm sure that I'll have other questions and each of the other board members will have questions, but we're just going to go in order that's been presented here today. Lot J, Cordish, I don't know who you've tapped to speak on your behalf.
I guess I'll go first, but there are other people to answer the question.
Mr. Harden, you always have a good team behind you, so you can start.
Otherwise, I'd be in last place most of the time. I'm Paul Harden, by the way. I represent the Lot J entities. And I have Mega Parek, who is the chief legal officer with the Iguana Group, and Gil Bain, who is our contractor, and Tetra Tech, who are our engineers. Forgive me, I have a little bit of a cold. I apologize.
All right.
I'm going to start with what we disagree with.
Okay.
Because it's sitting right up there on the first slide, or the slide that's up there, the workforce engagement culture, suggesting that our location isn't as accessible for workforce engagement and culture. And I don't know how you could be more positive on this entity on this line for our site. Starting in front of us is the Dailies facilities, and then coming around is going to be the new live Cordage facility. Currently, there's the baseball stadium there. Next to that is the arena that has shows 275 days a month, a year. And then next to that is the Ayfield Randolph activity where the Intuition Ale is. We are not isolated there. There is a lot, and I heard your staff suggest that someone had given them a chart, and maybe we didn't do a good job giving the chart, but I know what's there, and I know where the other two locations are, and I couldn't go around those locations and show you the engagement activity that we have at that facility. We have on the site hundreds of employees who are there every day, have been for now on 25 years. And we have a terrific culture with our employees. And for us to be 25 points down, which would have put us up far in the lead on that, is a little bit shocking to me. There was one other issue, the development schedule. I confirmed with the Cordage folks, and the Gilbane folks are here right now, but our construction schedule is not the 35 months. It's right at the 29 months that was suggested. And if there's a mistake on that, we'll be happy to admit up to it. But the Gilbane folks are here today, and they can answer that question. With regard to that development schedule, and this, I'd like to maybe look at the slide on the risk factors. Respectfully, I don't think it's suggested properly, the risk factors. The the remediation was the first risk factor.
19.
Pardon me?
19, sorry, slide 19.
Okay. Let me start on the remediation issue that was suggested that was an issue. We've been working on this site for 15 years. We just built within the last year Daly's Place. You don't have to guess what we're going to do on the site. We had to come through Lot J. We had to deal with the remediation issue. We've done that within the last year. We've been working with the city of Jacksonville. We have a lease that lasts for another 15 years, hopefully another 50 years on that site. As an ongoing activity, we deal with this remediation issue. We have on the table for our review and for the city's review today a final remediation plan with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. That's an issue that's days away from being resolved, and it will be once we know what we need to do on the site. We went through that piece of iron that they suggested was a problem. We had to take utilities, some of which are your utilities, straight across Lot J. We've been in and out of that site now, as I say, for 15 years. We did a $90 million renovation on the stadium going through that site. We did about a $50 million renovation or a new building on Daly's in that same area. So all these issues, and I'll walk through them. I don't know what you'll be addressed on financing. I don't think that was an issue. Our principles are pretty substantial, but
You didn't get flagged for financing.
yeah, I know. I see that with zero. It's not my bank statement they're looking at. Thank you. Land control. We have this piece of property under a lease. No one else can use it. We have it under a lease that's going to continue for at least another 19 years. We have an agreement with the city within days of knowing about what you guys or ladies are going to do on this site. They will enter into a development agreement. We have a form of development agreement. We are literally days away from entering into an agreement to control the land that we already control under a lease. And by the way, we pay for that as part of our stadium rent. So I don't know what the flagging is on the land control. The land viability is what I just started out with, was the remediation and the viability of the site. Excuse me. On the adjacent corner to this site, Cordage is going to build one of their live facilities. Again, we've been working on this for a year and a half with our partner. We're ready to start on that live facility. We're building another site there, so the land is clearly viable. You've got two major investors, Cordage and then the Kahn family, who think that the land's pretty viable because they're getting ready to do a $3 billion plus project on that site. The remediation, I guess, is part of that land viability we've already spoken to. We have a finished agreement with the DEP on the remediation issue. Planning and approvals, I'm not sure why we would be marked down or you'd think it a risk for us to go to the DDRB. We just went to the DDRB on dailies. We just went through the DDRB issue with changes at the football stadium. We are well versed in what's going to be needed at that location. With regard to planning approvals and zoning and that sort of thing, Councilwoman Boyer introduced a bill rezoning all of that land to CCBD, which allows us to do anything, including this use on the site. With regard to the garage, the risk factor, we have been negotiating with the city on that. No matter what happens with regard to JEA, and certainly we hope you are our tenant at that site, but no matter what happens on that site, there's going to be a parking garage built adjacent to Lot J. They're going to take away 1,300 spaces of the properties that we currently have in our Lot J that we use for parking. Those have to be replaced. It's going to be replaced with a 3,000 to 3,800 space garage that's already designed, already priced out, already netted out. The locations been decided. So I guess the risk factor there is the city of Jacksonville, not the entity that you're dealing with here. But we feel very comfortable that our ongoing partner on the stadium will do what they say they'll do. Negotiations of risk factor, indicator of intent, I'm not sure. I guess that was David's or Mr. Cohen's comments that they had some going back and forth. But let me just say this. Over the last 25, 28 years, the entity you're dealing with has negotiated a major lease on this site with the city of Jacksonville. We've negotiated 20 changes to that lease. We've negotiated a lease on Daly Stadium with the city of Jacksonville, and they've all been, to use someone's analogy, put in the end zone pretty quickly. And so you don't have to guess as regards who you're dealing with. I think Stuart and Mr. Green indicated the main factor you should deal with is who your partner is going to be. Well, you've got a pretty seasoned partner. Mr. Khan, who is one of the entities that makes up the Lot J operation, has a multi-billion-dollar investment next door in the football stadium. Is getting ready to put about a $3 billion project, not including across Bay Street, but on this site, is going to be here for the next 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. And so I'm not sure how you could, you don't have to guess, I guess, is my point on that. And that segues into the third comment that you had, Mr. Chairman, is tell us why you should select us. You have a proven partner, a partner who's financially stable. It doesn't seem like a strong enough word in my mind. A partner that's done multiple projects at this location with the city of Jacksonville. I know you're an authority and separate and apart, but with the city of Jacksonville at this site, and is going to be here for another however many decades that they continue to play in the National Football League. So I think that we respectfully think there's some hiccups in the evaluation, the risk factor. I think because of the history of the entity you're dealing with and the other items that are the other projects they've dealt with on this site would suggest that the risk factors are very, very low with regard to that entity. Without poking anybody else in the eye, I think the risk is not in the Lot J partners, but the governmental entities that we have to get approvals from. And I'm pretty confident in the entitlement lawyer they're going to use. And so we feel pretty comfortable that those risk factors are minimal. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions or see questions.
Revenue bill. Ms. Green?
I think about public accessibility. You mentioned your neighboring all of the entertainment and sports venues as well as the Ale house.
Intuition Ale, yeah.
Intuition Ale. How much of that is using public transportation? And that is primarily, other than I think dailies, it's primarily weekend entertainment during that time, right?
No, you got the baseball team, which is in
Pays throughout the
their
week.
building, 90 nights a year. The arena, which is, I think 270 nights events a year. Intuition Ale, and I'm using Intuition Ale as the tag because there are multiple restaurants and facilities along that location. But most of that activity, it may be because of a sea change in how people travel, but it's almost all public transportation use. And then, of course, our games on the weekends, we use bus service. I skipped across, I wrote down about the bus service. I don't know if you recall, but in the presentation that Ms. Stewart did when we were here before, she indicated that 3 different zip codes are the zip codes that come to your site at this location. It's 32206, 32208, and 32209. We are in one of those zip codes. Nobody else is. We have discussions ongoing with the JTA about continued bus service at that location. And so we are clearly accessible to folks who use mass transit as opposed to Uber or public transportation, using a different term at that level. But we're the only one of the sites that's actually in one of the 3 zip codes that you have folks come to. 32209 is out west of downtown, and that's the one we're not adjoining. But we have constant access through mass transit to our site.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Johnson?
I still have a concern, and spoke about it a little bit with CBRE, around the utilities. And we talked about the land viability. I know you're in at DEP right now, but truly, you're talking about a water line that it's either gonna have some redesign or need to be moved. Help me lower that risk. Help me understand that a little bit
I'm
better.
not, which water line are you talking?
We have a 30-inch main there.
Right.
We've got a 30-inch main runs right underneath the proposed site.
Correct, that we just went across when we had to hook up to Dailies on that
Yeah, but
site.
you can't build an 8-story building on top of it.
Yeah, you guys had proposed moving to the middle of Lot N and M. I'm using terms that may not be familiar, but you guys, when I say you guys, the JEA had proposed moving that line to a location east of that site. I don't know if you recall our design of the Lot J, but it's pretty much in quadrants, so that the proposed office building, JEA building, would be on the northwest quadrant. On the northeast quadrant is the live facility that Cordish is going to build. The utilities would be moved into a roadway that goes through the middle of those 2 sites and then divides the southern 2 quadrants as well, and then comes across to serve the shipyard site, and then where you folks are doing business going, I will say under the river at that location. But there's already a design for location of those utilities, and it's not something that's ongoing as a result of the JEA site. It's something we've been working on for a couple of 3 years, well, 4 years if you count the shipyards.
That would be developer's expense, correct, Mr.
Oh,
President?
yeah. That's out of our pocket, and we would be responsible for that. And we already have a plan to deal with that as part of our ongoing development of the other 3 quadrants at that location. So it's not just your site that we have to deal with that and move it. It would be as a result of the other 3 developable quadrants. And then, of course, the 40 acres across the street that we hope to develop as well.
Anything else? Ms. Green?
Real quick, will any of the other proposed projects be happening simultaneously if you are awarded?
The live project likely will happen either simultaneously or slightly before. Live is a term that Cordish uses to describe the 40 or 50 sites they've built next to arenas and football stadiums and baseball stadiums. It'll be about a 7-story, 70,000 square foot facility adjacent to the football stadium at the west entrance. And so that activity would be starting about the same time. And Ms. Green, we also will be doing general development activity. To the chairman's point, it's our expense and our responsibility, but we're preparing that entire site for development for all 4 of the quadrants. And we're waiting to hear from you before we give a development agreement to the city on that site.
Couple of follow-up questions, just quick hits. The development agreement you discussed, it's in the works. Would that have to be approved by city council, I assume?
It would, yes.
Do you anticipate that being submitted in the next 3 to 6 months?
We were asked by the city how quickly after you make a decision will we submit it, and we told them 6 days. So the document is complete or drafted, and it depends on some other moving parts that we don't control, but it's a document that's been vetted and prepared.
Regarding the site issues.
Excuse me.
It's all right, the site issues. We talked about the 30-inch water line. What subsurface assessment has been done either by Iguana or Cordish or any other partners on this deal? Because we're aware of additional utilities that are subsurface there, and I've been told that you're probably going to have to relocate the TV tower as well. So
Not the TV tower, one of the stanchions, but that's not
guy
not for your building. That would be for the parking garage.
okay, well, done at the same time.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. And then a question that you may have to defer to another team member for. I noticed in the presentation materials responsive to the J7, I'm going to get it wrong, LMSDW.
I got it.
Those. As I read the chart on the projects listed by Cordish, I'm looking beyond you now, all of the projects listed either met or exceeded the minority and small business targets. Was that a listing of representative projects, all projects you've done in the last 10 years, or just select projects?
Yeah, there's nobody from Cordish back there.
Oh, so sorry. That's why they're
That's
giving me
okay,
those blank
but you can
stares.
look past me if you like. I'm used to it. But
You know the answer?
I do know the answer to it because, again, you don't have to guess. We built a football stadium at that location and exceeded the JCEP requirements by almost 15%. We did renovations on putting in the scoreboards on the north end zone and met the and I'm using JCEP as a term to encompass all of that. We met those requirements and exceeded them by I think 5 or 10%. And on dailies, the same thing. So there are guesses. Whether Cordish does it or not, the folks who own the other investment at that location are going to continue to be here. We make those promises as part of our contractual relationship with the city, and we've met them for 25 years. We're going to meet them for the next 35 years.
Any commitments to continue to own the building as opposed to sell it?
Which building?
The JEA headquarters.
We're prepared to continue to own the building. That's a little bit of the issue, I think. I don't know whether it's Stuart or Michael that raised the issue about the 20-year the 20-year lease. The 15-year lease kind of demands that someone flip the building, if you will, within that 15 years. We're not going to do that, and we're going to continue. We're going to continue to have an investment next door, and we're going to have a continued investment at that location, and our intention is to continue to own the building and have us be I say Lot J. I'd like to think I'm going to be here 50 years from now, but whoever is representing them at the time will continue to own that facility.
Thank you. Any other questions to the Lot J Cordish group, Mr. Harden, or other members of the team?
Not me.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, one last question. Who's going to pay for the garage to be built? It's not built into our cost, just curious.
It is not built in. It's a city project. The city has an obligation to replace a certain number of parking spaces. They've asked us to do an assessment of who's going to use up the 3,000 spaces. 850 of them are being held for the office building and then leased out. But it'll be a positive cash flow for the city as other parking areas are.
Okay, fair. Unless there's anything else, thank you, Mr. Harden. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Mr. Belanke, for Kings Avenue, I have the same 3 questions I'll remind you as you're walking up here. What's the greatest risk to Kings Avenue in meeting your timeline and development budget? What do you disagree with in the presentation from CBRE and staff? And why should this board choose you and your development team? Welcome.
Thank you, Mike Belanke, 1478 River Place Boulevard, Chase Properties. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today as we said last time we were all together, we were very excited about this process for the city and for JEA and their employees and customers. So we're really pleased to have had the opportunity to participate. I'll start out with what we disagree with. The timing, as we know, timing is critical to you guys, particularly with the fire alarm we had on here earlier. We know you're ready to get out of this building. And there's no other developer that has complete control of their property and no environmental remediation whatsoever to have to deal with. Entitlements are in place, the utilities are in place. So in spite of the timeline that was submitted as part of the analysis, nobody can beat us out of the ground. It stands to reason when you think about it. We've got a substantial head start. And so we try to always be conservative. But these contractors are all quality contractors, whether it be Gilbane or Brassfield and Gorey or whoever the third contractor is. They're all super qualified. They've all done billions of dollars worth of development, and they can all run comparable timelines. So the real question is who can get started the soonest, and there's nobody who can get started sooner than Kings Avenue Station. So we think that's a black and white issue, and we think it's a really important issue for JEA because time is money. There's also much less development risk if you go with a project like ours because we don't have to build a garage. We don't have to wait for the city to approve paying and building a garage. That creates a lot more additional financial risk because you never know what you're going to run into there. You may have to move big lines that you run into. You may have to remediate. But you also have to apply contingency to every dollar of construction. We've got, basically a $23 million garage that's already built, so we don't have to apply contingency there. As far as our contingency numbers are concerned, we had a very high contingency number because we want to be very conservative. We were told in this process that you can only go down on your number, you cannot go up. So make sure that you got everything covered in there. So we did. We went in and we over budgeted on certain things to be very, very conservative, knowing that whatever is left of that contingency at the end of the day will go back to JEA in the form of a discount off of those numbers. So we tried to be as complete and comprehensive on our budgeting as possible, so we didn't have to go back to you guys later and say, hey, we're having some problems here. That's no way to do a project of any kind, much less one of this magnitude. So that's a big issue. I agree with what they said about the design build thing. That is the one thing and I can tell you, having done projects both ways, that is the fox watching the hen house, because if they're designing it and building it, if they're running into a problem there, they're going to be able to cover it up better than it was if you had a contractor and an architect working, because they're going to be keeping an eye out on each other. So from my perspective, both forms of construction are doable, and CBRE would do a good job overseeing that. But from my perspective, it is another level of risk when you're doing a design build deal. It's just there's just no way around that from my perspective. Financing. They talked about, our financing may be subject to risk based on JEA's credit rating. Bostonia is our finance partner on this thing. They're super solid. CBRE, Mike Harold had a long conversation with them. They love this project. They understand JEA's ratings. They understand the whole Vogel deal. They have made a commitment to this project. They did a utility project in Mayport. They did a utility project at NAS. This is exactly what they do. It's right in their wheelhouse. So whether your company is a billion-dollar company or not, to me, is somewhat irrelevant. If you've got a commitment for financing from a super strong company in place, that's what you need to know, and we certainly have that commitment from them.
I'm sorry, Mr. Blanky, who's the financial partner?
Bostonia.
Bostonia.
Mm-hmm. Very well known in the utility circles. They do a lot of utility company financing, a lot of it. What was the second question you asked? I'm sorry.
Well, you answered that one, what you disagree with. The first question was, what's our greatest risk? What's your greatest risk in meeting the timeline and development goals set forth in your bid?
I think our greatest risk would be having JEA make decisions in a timely manner. We know that it's a big organization and there's going to be a lot of input from JEA. We think we're a good fit for that. We're nimble, we're local. Collectively, our team has done over $10 billion worth of development. But either every member of our team lives here in Jacksonville or they have a strong office presence here in Jacksonville. That's going to get real critical when it comes down to making a lot of decisions, because you can get everybody in the room, and I'm famous for saying that. A lot of times when you're dealing with big, difficult decisions, you've got to get everybody in the room, otherwise it delays the process. And we know time guts a deal in development. So, if you've got to wait for the attorney to give an opinion based on what the architect says, and then you get that opinion, then the architect says, but that's not what I meant. What I really meant was this. It just tends to go on and on and on and on. So in our experience, having a strong local presence when it comes to a project like this is critical. And I just can't emphasize that enough. So that's the biggest risk there, and I think that's very manageable based on our model that we have. Why should we be selected for this particular project? Again, we go back to being the only company that's got control of the site with all the no remediation necessary. It's pad ready. Zoning's in place. The location will support. Another big factor to this is the location will be a strong supporter for the district. The city's got roughly an $82 million commitment to help subsidize the district. We want to make sure that they get their money's worth on that project, and one of the best ways to do it is to put 800 employees right across the street that'll utilize those services over there. We think that's a huge advantage, and it'll help the city get a good return on their investment. It'll also be a tremendous asset as far as restaurants and retail for the employees and customers of JEA. I remember hearing at one point that people thought the site was pretty small. Coincidentally, that site that we have, when you consider the garage is already there, the site that we have to develop is actually a little bit bigger than the site this building sits on. So we got plenty of room to make it work over there. That's not a problem for us. We've got Twin Flag Hilton Hotels on site, which I think is a wonderful amenity for the visitors that come to see JEA from out of town. And in the event of an emergency, if you ever had to do, we understand from the ITN that they have to have 24/7, 14-day lockdown opportunities in the event of a crisis. Those hotel rooms with overnight stay and extended stay could become very, very valuable to JEA and their employees in the event of an emergency. They can camp up right next door and be able to stay on the job. It's the ultimate transit-oriented development. When we went to JTA back in 2005, that garage was headlines, the ghost garage, and it was bleeding money. We constructed a $30 million hotel in our first phase, and we turned it around. It's profitable now. This project, based on the way we've got our model, will throw off over the 15-year base term $6 million to your sister utility company, to JTA. That's hugely important. We're talking about the ultimate public-private partnership, JEA, JTA, and us working together, and it benefits them. Finally, if you do an apples-to-apples comparison, and I know that they have to have this type of format for a lot of different reasons, but it's cumbersome for everybody. I know CBRE worked really, really hard. They did a great job on it. But when they go into a quiet period, it's cumbersome for us to be able to give feedback to clarify some of the issues. And so we've seen a number of issues today that we think are not necessarily accurate, timing being one of them, the budgets being another one. We think at the end of the day, if we were to do a forensic analysis, so in other words, I'm a real big believer in transparency. If we had all of the developers exchange their financial numbers and their timelines and let each other inspect the other person's work, I think we're going to all do a pretty good job analyzing that for you. And we're going to be able to come back and say, here's where we think maybe they're wrong or they're high or they're low. Here's where we think maybe they're talking about their timeline's not reasonable. And we could all come back and do an evaluation and then let you be the judge. You'd have the opportunity to have the benefit of all of our oversight on that. I don't know if that's going to be realistic for you guys to do that, but I sure like the idea of it. I'd love to have an opportunity to look at somebody else's numbers and tell them if I think they're realistic or not. And we'd be happy to show everybody our numbers and the work that went behind them, because we feel very confident that at a minimum, they're very conservative. We think at the end of the day, we're going to be not only the best location for JEA's new headquarters, but we think at the end of the day, all things being equal, we think we'll be the least expensive as well.
Thank you, Mr. Blank. If you'll hold for comments, questions. Reverend Newbill? Ms. Green? Ms. Johnson? I have a question. I assume that Bostonia is making their financing contingent upon a pledge of the lease with JEA?
I didn't understand you, I'm sorry.
The JEA lease will be the collateral support for the financing with Bostonia.
Correct.
Yeah. And are you in this as a merchant builder? Are you a buy and hold? Will you be our landlord long-term?
We'd be happy to be your landlord long-term. Obviously, we're local here. Parkway Properties has got a great presence here. I think most of the people in the room know them. They're a super strong company. They're excited about this opportunity, and they don't make any money if we turn around and sell it. So the goal is to keep it. However, we understand, we've been told that JEA has an interest potentially in buying that, and we would certainly work with JEA at whatever level they decided to do it. We want to be your partner on this. I agree. Having the right partner is key. I really think it's key. And we've worked through some hard deals with other partners before, and I can tell you it takes a commitment. It takes a real commitment to work through issues, and we've been successful in doing that. Everybody that's competing for this has been through the school of hard knocks, believe me. We can all talk about horror stories that we've had to deal with in other transactions. But I think all companies can also say that they've weathered through, and we're here today.
Ms. Kilgo, we didn't have a requirement that the bidders commit to holding title post-construction and after entering into the lease, did we? I don't remember the form of lease had any prohibitions on assignment beyond the usual, subject to our consent, not to be unreasonable.
During construction, we didn't want an assignment prior to.
Yeah, if you can just hear you, David, I'm sorry.
We didn't want an assignment prior to the completion of construction.
Ah, yes, thank you.
That was a limitation in the lease.
Okay.
So we'd be glad to negotiate a lease that says, okay, if you want to buy it, you can buy it. If you don't want us to sell it, we won't sell it. I mean, we're flexible when it comes to that. We just want to be your partner on it.
Sure. Anything else?
So,
Revenue
excuse me,
bill?
Mr. Chairman, under the garage matrix, the Lot J, Kings Avenue was shared, and then Adam was controlled. Now, is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about something else?
Well, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Kilgo, the controlled and shared issue is whether or not it's dedicated to us, and the only garage dedicated to us is the Ryan proposal. So the proposed new garage that Lot J would build and the existing garage that Mr. Belanky has would be shared with other third parties not dedicated to the use by JEA's employees.
But you could have reserved spaces in those specifically.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it partly. So then where the security comes in, under one, we would have the right to secure a certain area and have security guards. And I'm hearing with the others, we would have shared parking, so it doesn't seem that we would be able to have security.
No, you would have a security area.
We would have, I'm
Yeah.
talking about for the garage itself.
Sure. So, Mr. Belanky, let me ask you to respond directly regarding your garage at Kings Avenue, and then Ms. Kilgo, if you'll respond as to the other bids.
Yeah, we provided as part of the ITN, we provided a nesting plan, and we can have a security area that would be accessible only to JEA employees and or their customers. So you would have the option for complete security there.
Anything to add to that, Ms. Kilgo?
Yes, sir. In the ITN, we did say that we would consider a shared garage or a dedicated garage, but that we would handle security a little differently. We wanted the ability to provide an additional layer of security for our employees if it were in a shared garage, and I think everybody acknowledged that.
And in fairness, that'll apply to Lot J as well if they were the prevailing bidder.
So am I hearing at the end of the lease, there are a couple companies who we haven't negotiated that they would give us the option to buy the building. But
Ms.
one
Gilbert.
company has.
Ms. Gilger?
We ask every company in the ITN to give us the option to purchase in year 12 or 15, and also for additional lease renewal options beyond the initial 15 years. And I think everybody provided that, but David can tell you if they've said differently in the lease negotiations.
Mr. Edwards, I don't recall that anybody struck those from my review. That survived everybody's review?
Well, they did say open to discussion, some of the terms of the option to purchase and the right of first offer. And one particular did agree to it, but wanted to add a component as far as figuring out the purchase price. Ryan did. So we're still not totally solid on the terms of the option to purchase with Lot J and Kings Avenue, as far as I remember.
Those are major issues,
Yes.
not just significant.
All right.
Thank you.
Those are major.
But I would also like to add that in the interview segment we had with each company, Cordish and Ryan expressed an interest. They said, we'll work with you on terms, but their business model is to buy and hold for the most part, and they like to own their own properties and manage their own properties.
Mr. Belanky, do you and your development team currently own any of the projects you've developed in the
We
past?
do. Yes, we do. Yep.
Do you have a current intention with respect to this project?
Just to win it and work with Jay.
I meant owning and or selling it.
By working with JEA on what's a win-win deal for them. So no, we're totally open to that. We're totally open to that. This we're not going into this with the merchant, but we've been instructed that would probably not be a good idea. And so we spent a lot of time and money to get to this point, knowing that it was probably JEA's preference that we not merchant build it. So
I think you got that message correctly.
yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Belanky regarding the Kings Avenue bid? Thank you, Mr. Belanky.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time.
Thank you for your time.
So we'll invite the Ryan's representatives up. And again, my three questions were the greatest risk for Ryan in meeting your timeline and development proposal, what you disagree with that CBRE or staff may have said, and why should we choose you?
Thank you very much. Doug Deek with Ryan Companies. I'm the regional president. I'm right here in the region. Let me start by saying I think the process has been great. It's been thorough. It's been long. We haven't been here for 4 years, but I think CBRE and JEA and staff have really done a nice job with the process. We've been through this many, many times. This has been a good one. The greatest risk, from my perspective, was hit on. I think it's JEA's ability to make decisions along the way early on in the design process to make sure the schedule moves along. CBRE and JEA drilled into that early development plan pretty well, and I think they did that because they sensed that was the real risk. So there are three critical paths to get to the start of construction. One is, in our particular case, this DDRB, DIA approval process. Two is just the normal governmental approval process, site plan approval, stormwater management approval, et cetera. And then the third is JEA's ability to make decisions along the way with the design. And those come in a couple tranches. We can do it pretty quickly relative to the size of the building after we get through a program and a footprint, and that releases structural design, releases the design to move along such that we can start the deep foundations. So that's the greatest risk to the schedule, but it doesn't last long, and it's quantifiable. So that's the first. What do we disagree with? I would say the customer service center kind of scoring that we saw, I think we've got a pretty good solution on the first floor. Maybe it wasn't vetted as far along as JEA would have liked, but it absolutely can be the perfect solution. We've got parking in the garage separate from the employee parking that customers can use. Of course, we're very well located relative to transportation. And then on the first floor, good access from the garage, good access from the street right into the customer service center. So we feel good about that. I would have revised that score. And then why? Why Ryan? Why select us? I would say a couple things. One, this is what we do. There are many different areas of the real estate development business. This is what we do. This is what we do best. We know corporate build-to-suit. I've been involved with 5 million square feet of corporate build-to-suit myself, Ryan has done over 100 of these projects. We know corporate build-to-suit. We've got this very specific experience. Second, I would say the downtown core is important to the health of Jacksonville's downtown, but it's also important to the health of the entire MSA. All of your customers want a healthy downtown. If JEA decides, well, being in the civic core is optional, is it optional for City Hall too? The downtown needs to be healthy. This is where this building belongs, and I think our site provides the best opportunity to reinforce the commitment to the civic core to downtown. Then I would say this slide up that's been up here for a while now on the dependency evaluation. Why should you select us? We have put our heart into this. Everybody has put our heart into this. It's been a long process, but we have tried to lead with experience and lead with completeness, thoroughness, answering the questions. You know, as Stu said, the best athlete, we've tried to be that. We think we've demonstrated that. I think that's important. And then I think the one company approach, developer, designer, builder, property manager, is the exact right solution here. We recommend an open book process. We're not only the hen watching the chicken coop, the hen, they're right here. You've got them. You've hired them. They're doing a great job.
No, they're the foxes.
They're the foxes.
Yes.
We'll just be inside. Yes, you're correct. So you've got that. I think the seamlessness in our approach, the ability to look down the hall as opposed to call, no finger pointing to other companies. I didn't have that. You didn't negotiate that with me. We don't have that. We have to do it all together as a team. I think that's very important. I think those are the 4 reasons why you should select us.
Thank you, Mr. Deet. Appreciate your brevity in that. I'll open that up. Ms. Johnson?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Green?
No questions.
Reverend Newbill? How many projects has Ryan done in Jacksonville or Northeast Florida? I'm sorry if you included that in your presentation. I overlooked it. I didn't see it.
Yeah, we're under construction right now with a $50 million senior living facility in the Tamaya area, which is on Beach Boulevard.
Okay.
We have been working in the area doing some remodeling work for Target. We have not done 25 projects in this immediate area.
On the corporate build-to-suit projects that you were touting a moment ago, how many of those in Florida or Southeast region? I know Ryan's not a Florida or Southeastern company.
Yeah, Mosaic, their regional headquarters, which they just actually relocated to from Minneapolis to be their corporate headquarters, is a building that we developed.
Where's that?
That's in suburban Tampa.
Okay.
Jackson National Life, another corporate build-to-suit in Tampa that we did. Nationwide Insurance in Gainesville. We've worked in their corporate headquarters or regional headquarters there. So that names a couple that we've done.
You said that you had done 5 million square feet of corporate build-to-suit. How much of that was in Florida? Were those projects in Florida?
Those 3.
Okay.
Yeah. Those are all office corporate build-to-suit. We've also done work for Amazon as a build-to-suit. That was an industrial project. Gray Bar, an industrial project. Others, but a little bit of apples and oranges there.
Okay. Reverend Bill? Oh, I thought you were waving at me.
No.
Ms. Green, Ms. Johnson? Maybe we're just tired, and maybe you answered all the questions. Yeah.
Maybe
Thank you,
you're just
Mr.
tired.
Deet. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so, gosh, it's been 2.5 hours. Do people need a quick break before we move on to the next portion? You want to forge ahead?
Thank you.
That's an answer, yes. We'll take a 5-minute break before we move into board scoring. 5 minutes. You take your seats, we'll resume from our recess. So per the agenda, the next item is board scoring and instructions. The ITN did not dictate that how the board would score, only that the board would score. The proposed scoring that you have in front of you is, well, it's my idea. If it's a bad idea, I'm open to other ideas. We have adopted this past year a strategic framework, and as a board have approved 4 core values by which JEA measures its performance and against which it measures proposed actions. I can think of no more significant proposed action over the last year than the selection of a new headquarters. As you'll recall, those 4 core values that JEA has adopted are customer value, financial value, community impact value, and environmental value. It's my suggestion, subject to the approval of this board, that we use our 4 core values to provide a framework for this board's evaluation of the 3 bids. Our scoring for each of the bids would be averaged, divided by 4, and then added to the scoring that has already taken place as presented previously on the qualitative, quantitative, and the presentation and interview scores. So in addition to the 660 possible points, my suggestion is an additional 100 points awarded, up to 100 points awarded by this board to each of the 3 bids across these 4 measures of corporate value. I throw that open for discussion by this board because we've not had an opportunity to discuss how we would otherwise assign values and ranking from the board, only that we would do so. That's what's in the prior board resolutions and ITN. So, thoughts?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think it's necessary to statewide board chair, by board member Kelly?
Oh, by
Flanagan
Ms.
is not
Flanagan's
here?
recused? Yes, probably prudent. Thank you for reminding me. Ms. Flanagan is a sitting board member of JEA, but has recused herself because she's the chief financial officer of the Jacksonville Jaguars NFL franchise and perhaps some of its affiliates, but is conflicted out because Iguana is a bidder, one of the 3 bidders. So thank you for reminding me of that. I neglected to say that earlier.
And with that being said, I agree with your proposed scoring process.
There may be
on-
better ideas. If you've got one, I'm open to.
No, I think this is.
I think it's a good
yeah,
one, especially with an
Okay with
uneven
that?
board vote.
I think it's
Especially with it being 4:30.
Okay. Some people have dinner plans. Okay. So with that said, we've got just some, this is not to be assigned values as a subcategory. We've got some blurbs here that discuss how we might evaluate each of these core values. For customer value, we've listed location, accessibility, welcoming transit, parking, providing customer solutions, remote and on-site customer engagement opportunity. For financial values, the stewardship element, the development risk that serves the long-term needs and investment goals of JEA. For the community impact value, the economic development, adaptable, safe, secure employee-based location to serve community, and community investment. And finally, the environmental value, the building efficiencies, building materials, energy, water, and water efficiencies, and LEED standards. So before we move to take a few minutes for scoring, any questions on the methodology? You would assign a value in each of those little squares for each bidder between 0 and 25. We'll take our scores after we voted. We'll give them to Jenny, yes? Julie, I'm sorry, Julie, to input with the scores that are already on the board for the qualitative, quantitative presentation and interview. And that will determine the final rankings. We will then come back for a vote on the highest ranked bidder. I think that's it. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I just ask the audience to give the board a few minutes to reflect and score the 3 bids. Thank you. draw your own totals at the bottom.
Perfect to have.
Talking business up here, we're talking that multiple apps open on your iPad at one time. Impressive. Board Member Johnson will be given instructions and lessons after the board meeting.
Multitasking.
Multitasking.
Anyways.
It is. Yeah. I think it's almost done now. So we have two staff members who are independently verifying the board scores, inputting them, averaging them, and adding them to the previously announced scores. Ms. Kilgo asked if I'd like to make the announcement. I said after 4 years, she should have the pleasure. Is the new one? Okay. Thank you. The board members all have it? Yeah. Passing out proposed board resolution 2019-03, which would approve the winning bidder. It's left blank right now. I ask the board members to review that. When we get the highest ranking bidder, I'll ask for a motion to fill in the blanks. For the board members, note there's a blank in paragraph 3 for the authorization to negotiate to expire. If within a blank number of days, the winning, highest ranking bidder does not obtain site control over the subject property and present a final negotiated lease. So I want to have discussion around that, what that blank should be. Mr. Green, do you have some thoughts, or Mr. Edwards and Mr. Green, some thoughts on what a reasonable amount of time would be within today's date within which to require the highest ranking bidder to get site control, if applicable, Mr. Belanky, site control and a final lease to be presented to the board? Be interested in having your thoughts on that.
Yeah, we had thought 120 days for the lease, get a final lease.
And that parallel path that on your timeline with the other activities that would be undertaken? Okay. So we're not dead in the water for 120 days while you guys are hammering out the details?
Correct.
Okay. So that's a suggestion from the experts. You hold their foot to the fire a little faster, or of course they make money the sooner they get it done too.
Is that just industry standard, or is that based on how negotiations have gone thus far?
A little both. For prior experience, I would think we'd take, I mean, I'd like to say 90 days or less, but if we don't want to drop that date, 120 would probably give plenty of time, and maybe less motivation. A shorter time would give more motivation to get it done sooner for the lease, not necessarily for site control.
I think 90
Ms.
days.
Johnson?
I think 90 days is appropriate, that they've certainly had the ample amount of time for the planning process, et cetera, since October, and if not, in some instances before that. So I think 90 is appropriate.
Yeah.
But not control of the land, is that what we're
Well,
saying?
that's the other issue. It's not just the lease, it's control of the land as it would apply to Lot J and as it would apply to Adams Street, both of whom are negotiating with the city. So you would think that our friends across the street would be amenable and motivated to get it done. Do you know any people over there?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
You wouldn't be able to lease land either.
Well, you could get the lease approved, I get it, but that's the time issue. It's not just the lease, it's getting site control. So,
What did Mr. Zahn say? We wouldn't be able
You wouldn't
to
be able
complete the lease?
execute I mean,
yeah, you can't
No.
sign a lease unless you control the land.
Okay, that answers it for me.
I guess you could, contingent upon land control, but you wouldn't want to.
that wouldn't be
That would be
fully.
really
Right.
responsible.
Maybe we should wait till
That's a
after
thought.
we see where we are, and then we'll,
May not be relevant,
correct.
the site control element. You know, in most courtrooms, it's not the judge, it's the foreperson of the jury who gets to announce the verdict. Sometimes it's just the clerk who gets to announce the verdict. You can play the role of all three here.
Thank you. I'm going to announce the average score for company from the board scoring. On Lot J, add 69.25 points. That's the average score. On Kings Avenue, add 63.25. And on Adams Street, add 78.75. That gives you total scores, the score to date that we already had, plus the board average score of 568.25 for Lot J, 534.25 for Kings Avenue, and 585.75 for Adams Street.
Julie, do you concur? Thank you very much. We've got a proposed resolution set forth here. Ryan would need to obtain site control. So I think what we'd like to do is fill in the blanks here and then have a motion to approve the resolution and then follow-up discussion, if any. Can I put in 90 days? Are you comfortable with that?
I'm comfortable with that.
Comfortable with that? So then let me ask for a motion to approve Resolution 2019-03, authorizing negotiation with, I'm just going to put Ryan, not the formal, you can put in the formal name. And under paragraph 3, authorization to negotiate will expire within 90 days. Following the date hereof, Ryan does not obtain site control over the subject property and a final negotiated lease to be presented to the board. I have a motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Do I have a second?
Second.
I'll take that from Ms. Johnson. Discussion around this resolution, I know you just got it today. It provides that the final rankings are approved, that the CEO and Managing Director of JEA or his designee is authorized and directed to negotiate a build-to-suit lease agreement and construction addendum with Ryan as the highest-ranked firm. The lease shall be subject to the terms and conditions of the invitation to negotiate, the firm's best and final offer, the conditions of award, and such other terms and conditions as the CEO or his designee may determine to be in the best interest of JEA. The authorization to negotiate shall automatically expire if within 90 days following the date of resolution, the firm does not obtain site control over the subject property and a final negotiated lease is not presented to the JEA board for final approval. This approval and authorization to negotiate is subject to JEA's right to terminate negotiations with the firm and move on to another firm if the conditions above are not satisfied and shall be effective immediately upon adoption. Any questions or discussions regarding that resolution or the final scores or anything else? No. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. So the motion carries unanimously. That concludes our business. The next board meeting is April 23, 2019, and we stand adjourned.